Nearly 150 years ago, slavery was abolished in the U.S. with the passage of the 13th Amendment. Today, slavery is illegal in every country and is considered an international human rights violation. Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights asserts that no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. And yet, despite its illegality, today it is estimated that there are anywhere from 1.4 to 4.5 million sex slaves in the world, 98% of whom are women and girls. The U.S. Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 defines sex trafficking as a commercial sex act brought about by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. Regarding international trafficking, developing countries generally serve as source countries from which victims are transported, while developed countries such as the U.S. and the Netherlands are largely on the receiving end of the trade. They fuel demand for the sex industry. In poor nations, the jobs in the formal sector are few, especially for younger, relatively uneducated women. Thus, they often are relegated to a shadow economy in which traffickers prey on their vulnerability. They deceive the women, telling them that there are employment opportunities abroad, that they can earn decent money working as waitresses, nannies, shopkeepers, or hosts at clubs. With little offers elsewhere, they usually accept the invitation to leave their country, but soon victims find themselves trapped, indebted, and isolated. They are beaten, raped, and/or drugged into submission. There is no question that sex trafficking is a grave injustice and a matter for public policy both domestically and abroad. Freedom from human bondage is an internationally recognized fundamental human right, a right supported by numerous laws and treatises. But according to Andrew Cooper, rights are meaningless unless they specify who bears the counterpart obligations to deliver on those rights. The moral and legal responsibility for sex trafficking falls on sex traffickers who coerce and sell victims, business owners who buy and exploit victims, and clients who objectify victims and create demand for sex slavery. These agents are individually responsible insofar as they can be isolated from others and held liable for their unlawful actions. And yet this isolating concept, as Marion Young calls it, is not adequate by itself because it does not consider the political responsibility of collectives. Sex trafficking is a complex issue entrenched in exploitation, sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, and gender exploitation. Each of these factors are so inextricably linked to one another that attempting to untangle one as the main source of injustice is futile. Ultimately, sex trafficking is a result of power imbalances that occur at the local, national, and international level, and thus political responsibility falls on each. Sex trafficking consists of a global public in which some players possess more authority than others. According to John Dewey, a public does not come into existence until people are affected, either indirectly or directly, by negative externalities of government or market actions. In this case, sex slavery is an underground global market in which traffickers, smugglers, business owners, and patrons of sex work all participate at the expense of poor, relatively powerless women, children, and even some men. Later in his career, Dewey also acknowledged that the consequences of some problems, such as sex trafficking, are not always limited to the domestic realm. They can have global implications. According to Daniel Sarowitz, certain facts of a particular problem are more salient than others depending on an expert's values, interests, and discipline. This is true regarding the sex industry as well. When prostitution is seen as a choice by some experts, but as a result of intersecting inequities by others, the issue of sex trafficking becomes vulnerable to the same dichotomy, which affects how this crime is received by other experts and ultimately what obligations are and are not met. Women who are told that they will be engaging in sex work for money are seen as more at fault for their fate, even if they end up in horrendous conditions in which they receive no money, than those who are misled into trafficking under false pretenses. In his work, Thomas Pogge addresses the global economic order that perpetuates poverty. He argues that poverty is a result of an international alliance among developed countries and the elites of poor countries. This relationship only serves the interests of the powerful, while the poor must endure the negative consequences. Alison Jagger expands upon Pogge's theory by asserting that women particularly suffer from this international system of institutions and norms. Poverty drives women into vulnerable and gendered realms of employment, such as sex work and potentially sex trafficking. For both theorists, institutional reform is paramount. Men as a collective cannot ignore their own responsibility in the perpetuation of sex trafficking and other violent injustices committed against women. Similar to May and Strickwerda's framework for rape, men share responsibility for sex trafficking because they make up the majority of traffickers as well as the clients who pay for sex. Moreover, men benefit directly and indirectly from sex trafficking in a number of ways. Less competition from women in the formal sector, especially in developing countries, monetary gains in the case of male traffickers, pleasure, and more broadly the continuation of male dominance in both the private and public spheres. In sum, the privileged have the obligation to confront the complex issue of trafficking. Developed nations, their governments, NGOs, private sectors, and even their citizens possess the capacity to fulfill the three prongs of the UN's Palermo Protocol: prevention of trafficking, persecution of perpetrators, and protection of all victims. One necessary component in ending trafficking will mean confronting global poverty, which acts as a large part of the foundation of sex trafficking. And men, especially privileged men, bear a greater responsibility than do other members of this global public. While gender parity continues to improve in the U.S. and in certain countries abroad, men still remain in greater positions of political power and public visibility than do women, giving them the platform not only to speak against trafficking, but hopefully to eliminate it.